Hello, Luke.
I'm almost dead.
You're almost dead. All
Yep.
right. All right. So today we have something special. We're going to be interviewing our guest, Luke Shi. Luke is a hardware engineer,
Nope.
technologist, and a
Nope.
University of Toronto graduate with a degree in computer engineering.
I have a
First of
college
all,
degree in nothing.
congratulations on your new job at Apple. That's an incredible feat and something to be very proud of.
Thank you.
Why don't you tell us about yourself beyond those top level highlights?
Pardon, could you repeat your questions? It cut off just now.
Why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself in your own words?
Me. Hi. My name is Luke. Um, as Gary just said, I'm a recent graduate from the University of Toronto. Focusing my studies on computer architecture. I don't know. What else should I say?
Why don't you start there? Why don't you tell us about computer architecture? Like, what does that mean, and what do you actually do? Because a lot of folks like myself don't really know what that means.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So computer architecture in a very high sense is basically designing a CPU, but on a very high level. So we basically maybe you draw like two black boxes and it's what those two black boxes do and how they work, and you basically run some simulations on that possible architectural scenario and see if it works. If it works out, then you pass on to maybe lower like hardware engineers that write things like Verilog, like hardware oriented code to actually realize these designs and do further testing on those. So sort of computer architecture is sort of is like an architect. You draw and piece out other things and let the builders do the actual building. So that
Right.
is sort of computer architecture.
Right. So you're basically the designer and the architect of new computer systems or improved computer systems,
Yeah,
like phones, like laptop computers, desktops, like is it everything
Yeah,
or
yeah, yeah. So yeah, computer architecture is basically everything that has to do with computer. Like in a computer, you have various parts. You have the PCB, the printed circuit boards. You have various routing circuits, right? Those are also maybe part of computer design too, like CPU designs. You have CPUs, you have your graphics card, your GPUs, you have your sound cards, you have your various things. You have your DRAMs, you have interconnects and everything in between.
so let me ask you a question then. How is a computer that much different than, let's say, the computer that came out before? Like, why do we need new architectures all the time? Like, if we have more RAM, why don't we stick a different RAM into where the RAM previously was? Like, what's new in the world of computer architecture? Tell me.
So, so in terms of computer architecture, the things they improve on from year to year is like from the very beginning, we have only like one core, one thread. Then basically it means that you can only run one process at a time. But as there is then there's operating systems that gives you virtual threads. That means you can do stuff simultaneously. But that still have some limitations where only there's only one core. That means there's only one thing that can be worked at a single time. Then over the years, around the 2000s, I believe, we first saw dual core CPUs from AMD, and now you have two cores that can do two different things on top of those software threads. So that improves efficiency. And from there, we have in terms of core counts, we are at four 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 cores, eight threads, eight cores, 16 threads, 32 cores, 64 threads, and so on, blah
All
blah
right.
blah.
So
Yeah.
basically, as hardware improves, as software improves, the computer has to be designed differently to kind of suit those needs.
Yeah.
That's a good
So
way to
yeah, and
understand it.
there's other things, right? So we are talking about that is sort of like scaling out the processor. Then there's also a lot of improvements on the processors, like the single cores itself. You can have a wider bus, which means that it can grab more instruction, it can do more things at once. There's things like prefetching, which basically brings in the stuff that might be useful later. But if you want to bring it in, since you're free right now, you can bring it in so you don't have to do that wasted time later. And there's things like what else is predictions, like branch predictions, which is basically predicting if there's a if else statement or there's a while statement, do we continue, do we go to A or do we go to B? And those predictions in these days on modern CPUs has gotten to very, very good. So if you have like a 1,000 instructions of like if else statement of prediction to do, their failure rate is around 0.014, something along those lines. Like it's
Wait,
super
so you're
tiny, right?
telling me that the CPU or the computer can predict what instruction it will run before it sees the instruction,
Yes,
and
yes,
the
and there's
failure rate
various.
is 0.014%.
Yeah, it's super super low.
That's
It's less than one
wild.
percent.
So
That is
we're
less than
basically
one
talking, if
percent.
it's 0.014%, then we're talking about like what, 1.4 in 100,000? Is that the right math?
Yeah, yeah, something along those lines.
That's
Like it is
crazy.
ridiculous,
These computers are getting crazy.
and this is only due. This is only my own, based on my own simulations. Like if you look at the industry standards, that I believe that they are way way lower than what I've achieved on my own coursework. But yeah, that is sort of like a very. I'm not sure it's a very good benchmark, but I feel like the number should be much lower. So take that number with a grain of salt.
All right, all right. So speaking of these like industry standards and intelligent computers and faster CPUs and whatnot, uh, tell me what it's like working at Apple. Recently, Apple released their new Apple M1 chip. A lot of reviews has been coming out saying it's like super fast. It's different architecture. Can you speak to me? Like, what do you know about this? What can you tell us about this new CPU, and how does that relate to what you've been telling us just now?
Sure. Even though my job at Apple, I am not working directly on the design of the architectures of the CPUs, like the M1 chip itself, but I can, from what I've seen, I could tell you some things about it.
All right.
So with the new M1 chip, the big thing is the move from x86 architecture to ARM. So basically, x86 architecture is something that was created by Intel a long while ago, and then it's considered a very complex instruction set. Basically, what it means that it can do a lot of complex tasks, and we're using one instructions only. But now we are moving over to what we call ARM, which is a type of RISC processor, which means that it's reduced instruction set, which means that every instruction is very, very simple. So we do an add and we do a multiply, we do a subtract, and basically that's it. For about if you do something like an x86, when we have very, very complex instructions, but maybe one instruction can also do add, multiply, subtract, divide all in one sequence. So if that's from that, x86 is architecture is much more complicated and it's much more resource intensive. So that is why Apple likes to move to ARM, which is basically what we're using in our phones, our tablets every day.
So you're basically
So
telling me the new M1 chip, which is an ARM-based processor, operates out of much more simple instructions, and therefore it's faster.
yeah,
Um,
so
but
yeah, so it's
but
much
like,
faster,
how does
much
that work? Because if I can do much more complex operations with a single operation versus like I have to do multiple operations, how does that equate to a faster CPU? Like, how does that work?
so basically a lot of very complex instructions can be broken down into very simple ones, right? And if you and there's something called there are things like dependencies, right? So basically, as a result of if you want to do maybe A plus B and A plus B equals to C, and C plus A equals to D, in hardware terms, that you have to basically wait for the result of C in order to do the second instructions. But if you sort of break it down into simpler instructions, you could maybe do some other instructions before waiting for that result of A equals to B. Can maybe do something like E plus F first. So that sort of gives reduces the latency between different instructions, and basically that gives you that increase. increases basically the throughput of the CPU, means that it can handle more instructions at once with that reduced
Mm,
instruction set.
so it's
And
more
with that,
granular and it's more specific.
yeah,
I
yeah,
see.
and with that, because of that because when you design your hardware, you have to design with instruction sets in mind. So if you have a more complex instruction set, you basically mean that your hardware CPU will be much more complicated. That means it will require more power and more design to get it to working. But with a reduced instruction set and everything is simpler, you also get a lot of power and efficiency gains from it.
I see. Okay. Moving on from that topic. So I want to talk about a little bit about your journey to Apple. So a lot of there's a lot of at the time of recording there's obviously the coronavirus pandemic. There's a lot of jobless claims and a lot of people are looking for jobs, and yet you managed to find a job at one of the biggest, or if not the biggest company in the world. Tell me about your journey. How did you end up in the position, and how did you strategize to kind of and get through the hurdles and the interviews, and how did you end up where you are?
Yeah, definitely. Um, I was very fortunate when during my last year of school, which started in 20 and September 2019, I started applying to big companies, Apple, Google, Microsoft, and I managed to get an interview before this whole coronavirus thing came up. So I was, in terms of job hiring and stuff, I think I was pretty lucky. And since it was before, so basically how the Apple interview works is you have basically 1 or 2 rounds of phone interview where they talk to you, either either talk about yourself or do some simple, not really simple, but do some coding questions to gauge how smart you are, or if you're compatible with the team. If you pass those 2 rounds, you get to they fly you out to Cupertino, which is the headquarters of Apple, to do an on-site, which is like an 8 hour full day of interviews. So
Wow, eight
yeah,
hours.
yeah,
So they sit you down and ask you questions for 8 hours? That's like a full day of work.
yeah. So basically, you go in at 10, then you come out at 5. Basically, it's like a 45-minute interview, basically round
How
after
many
round,
people
and
do you
in
talk
between,
to during the day?
around 45 minutes for each interview, so around 5, 7 or 8, depending on how many people interviews you. In some rounds, there's 2 people. In some rounds, there's 1 people. And of course, there's also a break in the middle, and you can sit down with the manager and sort of talk about other things other than just coding questions. So you can maybe use this opportunity to learn more about the team, more about your manager, about the job, things along those lines.
How would you, what other companies have you interviewed at other than Apple?
So I have also interviewed at Amazon, Microsoft, and Nvidia. Those were
Wow, so all the big
those were
companies.
yeah, sort of, I guess.
How would you, can you quickly describe to me the interview process? How is it different than Apple?
So yeah, definitely. So in terms of from my experience, in terms of Apple, since Apple has doesn't have a really big presence in Canada, we basically, if you have to apply for Apple, you have to go on their job search website and basically manually apply for each job individually. But for other jobs such as NVIDIA, Microsoft, and Amazon, they have a huge presence in Canada. So they have university recruitment teams that basically you just go to them and basically give give your resume to them, and they'll basically gauge that whether you're good, and they give you interview based on that.
Wow, so other companies have university recruiters where the recruiters will come to your university and take your resume and do the interviews. Whereas in
Yeah,
Apple or other companies that don't have a big presence in the Canada, you would have to manually go to the website. And I'm guessing these websites, they don't, you end up in a huge pile of other people's resume applied from all sorts of different countries and universities, and you would really have to stand out to be even offered a phone interview because they must be getting like hundreds of thousands of resumes every like every year or something like that, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Well, congratulations again on your job, and how do you
Thank
like
you.
it so far? What is it like?
Yeah, so I like my job quite a lot right now. I work in the OS, the core OS department, so I get to see a lot of the new OS updates, like the one we just had, the Big Sur, which is a very big one for Apple, and I also get to see a lot of the unreleased hardware, like the new MacBook and MacBook Air and MacBook Pros that came out. I got to see firsthand of how they work, and I have to say, the battery life, the performance on it is incredible.
Wow, and we do definitely see that as the devices come out and people making reviews of that. That was interesting. I want to briefly touch. I want to next move on to another topic. We know that Luke, you have a kind of hobby or are looking into a hobby into drone flying. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, yeah. So a few years ago, I got a present, DJI was a DJI Spark as a present from some as a birthday present. So that sort of started my venture into this drone world. Yeah, but yeah, with drones, you can they
Which
let
one
you
is
see
it?
a
Is it
really
a big drone? Is it a small drone? Does it
it's
have
a
a
small drone.
camera?
It's a very small drone, and the capabilities were quite limited, but that was the cheapest drone from DJI at the time, but it was somewhere to start, and it was capable enough to do a lot of things. Like it
What do
just
you
used
mean by capabilities? Is it like taking 4K video? Is it like doing flips,
no,
somersaults, like automatically
no.
landing? And what is it?
So like capabilities is like you get stable connection to your drone, so you fly your drone up a kilometer in the air, you don't lose it, it doesn't fly away. Like these are things that DJI is known for: obstacle avoidance, human tracking, things along those lines. Like those
Okay,
are features.
okay.
Yeah, those are the capabilities I'm talking
So
about.
when I see some of these YouTube videos or these National Geographic like footages, they're not from helicopters anymore. They're from drone footages and more intelligent drones that can track these animals in the wild or track you as you do a drive across a highway or something like that. And these are
Yeah,
more powerful
yeah,
drones that can track you and not lose you even though you move far away.
yeah, definitely. Yeah,
That's
the
crazy because
drone.
I once saw a documentary about Singapore and how Singapore is going to be like a city of the future. Like Singapore is a geographically very small country and a city state, and they need to use their limited land as effectively and efficiently as possible. And one of the kind of interviewees said that drone delivery technology will be the future and will replace basically all the traffic that needs to go through to like deliver an Amazon parcel to you, for instance. Do you see this future coming into the States, coming into Canada? Is this plausible, or is this just another kind of a mad scientist idea that someone's just throwing out there?
What I see about this as of right now, I don't think so. It is really feasible because there is two things you have to consider. First thing is the is how big the package is going to be, and when that factors into the weight. So a really big weight thing and a drone is the battery itself. Right now, the best consumer drones you can buy has the top has a battery life of at most 30 minutes, and you have to think about it, you have to make one trip there and one trip back, so you need a return flight, so at most you can only go 15 minutes away, and at current speeds, which is up to 60 kilometers an hour, 15 minutes is not very far. So there's a huge limitation with this kind of drones on how far you can deliver things and how much weight you can carry to it. And the second thing is, with new technology, there is always regulations that that needs to come in. So in this case, it will be the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration. that will basically govern this kind of stuff, or else you'll basically have drones flying
They'll bite
around.
your ass and say, no, you're not allowed to fly this drone. You need a permit. You're ruining our
Right,
airspace. And well, drones
right.
are low altitude, are they not? And
Yeah, they are, but they could go very high. So the newest drones can go up to 2 or 3 kilometers up in the air. And when you have small planes, like small planes, like drones are tiny compared to these planes. And you cannot see them until maybe 2 or 3 seconds before collision. And if it's a single engine plane, you crash into it, your engine goes out, you're basically a glider. You're done for. So
and you get engine
drones
failure
do,
and you're going down and you
yeah,
yell, Mayday, Mayday.
yeah. So drone do pose a very big aviation risk to commercial jets, to planes, to like single seater, like to passenger planes, because they are fairly small and it's really hard to control them. So right now you have players like DJI that basically have restriction zones around airports. That basically means that you cannot fly in those are no fly zones, so your drone cannot fly into these zones. And outside those airports, there is a height limitation, so you can only maybe fly up to 50 meters or 100 meters before they cap you off because it's on the like the
Mm.
landing path of the plane. So we don't want to cause any accidents. So there's a lot more needs to be done before this kind of drone delivery system will be widespread.
All right. So here's another question. So if you remember from, let's say, 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, I know that's a long range of days to kind of say, but we often dreamt about flying cars, and you see a lot of these animations and drawings about the future saying there will be flying cars, and cars will have wings and they'll have propellers, and they'll be flying all over the place. But if you look at people like Elon Musk and what he's doing with the city of Los Angeles is digging tunnels underground to reduce congestion. Uh, and how do you see that kind of shift playing off? Like we imagine the future to be aerial, like as in we deliver things, we transport things through the air. But what about underground? Like would we already have the infrastructure to convey like water and electricity, sewage back. We have a lot of different like internet cables, phone lines. There's a lot of infrastructure already underground, delivering it right to our houses. What about packages? Is like maybe if drones are too difficult, would packages and deliveries, obviously the smaller ones, maybe not like a whole like couch, but would a smaller one be able to like maybe dig an underground tunnel, would have a conveyor belt and a sorting system underground that can basically don't have to go through any FAA regulation? Like, is this a future you can see?
Yeah, definitely. Like this idea of sending letters, parcels underground has been here for hundreds, at least 100 years, right? If you look into the old mailing system in New York City in Manhattan, like there is that system. Like you basically throw letters down chutes, and basically it will travel underground, and someone will sort it, and it would travel all the way underground to where it needs to go and come back up,
So
right?
why is there
So,
this why is there always like this first imagination that everything will happen above ground, and whereas the kind of the more plausible, the more like efficient way to do things is underground?
I wouldn't say I'm not sure about efficiency because there's a lot of factors that come in because when you go underground, you have to do digging, you have to do a lot of ventilation and stuff. But if you do things like overground, you have to worry about other people's safety. There's a lot of things on that. But I think why people like to imagine things up there because I guess air travel and the idea of air travel in relative terms is much more newer and ever since the old times we have always looked into the stars, look into the sky and think, hey, how much
Right.
better if we have wings, if we can fly around and do a lot of and see the earth from
Okay,
from
I
a
can
top
kind of see
view, right?
that. No one wants to be a mole rat. Everybody wants to be the
Right,
bird. Flying across the
right.
sky. Okay, I
Yeah,
can see
so
that.
Yeah, yeah. Even from the old days, right? You see like Da Vinci's art, right? We always dreamt of being in the sky, right? So that is where we sort of a lot of people like the vision. I guess that might be one aspect to why people think like envision like in a few maybe 10 or 20 years, maybe you have everywhere everything is in the sky.
Mm, that makes a lot of sense. Great. I want to jump on to another topic here. So I heard amongst your friends, you're also known for all your strict finances. And as a man of knowledge, power, and influence, what does money really mean to you? Graduating and getting a job at Apple. How did your view and definition of money change for you before university and now? And what kind of advice, what would you do differently, say, 5 years before or 4 or 5 years before? And what kind of advice would you give to the younger version of Luke?
Uh, in terms of money views, I guess once you start working, you have basically more financial freedom to do more things you like. I grew up in
Absolutely.
a I grew up in a middle class family, not very rich. I have to get student loans to pay for my tuition for university. So all the money I've made during my co-ops, during my summer terms, I will basically save those up and
Did that
basically
give you
that
more
those
motivation, like having that student loan, having that debt? Did that give you like this more motivation to get a better job, get a higher paying job to pay off your student loans, or was this just like a big stress factor for you?
yeah, it definitely plays a factor in pushing you to get a better job, right? Let's say you're making a 50,000 job and basically maybe you have to work a year to pay it off. But if you make 100,000, you only have to pay here half a year, right? So that is definitely a factor that really pushes you to move forward, and it sort of lets you see education is really important as that is hard to get, and there's a lot of unfortunate people that cannot pay for this kind of education, right?
Mm-hmm. And I guess, what do you see? Like, you obviously went to computer engineering, you learned engineering and computer science and things like that. Um, what kind of lessons would you say, or principles of finance do you live by that is not taught at school? What's something that is important that you think that people should know? Is it, people say you should start investing early. Honestly, I think that's a great idea, and often not done enough. But what's something that you thought was very important that was not taught in school?
Yeah, so I think a very important thing is knowing how to budget. So a lot of people doesn't know how to budget means that they get their money and they just spend mindlessly. They do not know they do not know how much they can spend, like the spending limit. I feel like budgeting is a really big thing because that helps you to financial freedom. And if you do budgeting, you know how much you should spend. Maybe you can if you have a little leftover, you can splurge a little on other thing. And another thing is with budgeting, you can also do some investment, right? Like you said, like investment starting early is a very big thing because as there's a saying, right? Money makes money, right? You put in investment, even in the low end, you make 2 or 3% every year, and that grows over 10, 20 years to a large sum of money, like before you even know it. Like,
Right. So
yeah.
tell me more about this budgeting strategy that you have. So it's a lot of problems. I see myself doing this all the time. I set a monthly limit. I set a weekly limit. I budget out myself out like X amount of dollars. But then every time, obviously not these days because of COVID, but I would see myself with the boys hanging out at the bar or some club, or having drinks. And, obviously these drinks are very expensive when you go out. What, like, are you restraining yourself? Like, what is how do you mentally, like, keep yourself in check? Or are those moments, like, is it worth it to be over budget? Like, how do you address those situations mentally?
Yeah, so a very big factor in this kind of scenario is like what do you say, mental strength, I guess. Like I don't say I I'm not saying that going out once in a while and splurging a little, like you maybe go to bar and maybe it's a little more expensive and you basically don't eat at all. I'm not saying that, but you cannot do it every week and every day. Because if you do that, you basically, that is like not budgeting. You have your budget and basically just ignore it. That's not right. So I feel like you need to have certain mental strength that says that sometimes say, hey, like I am almost at my budget this month. I shouldn't go out anymore. I should maybe cut down on my spendings a little, right? But if there is things that you really like, maybe you can splurge a little, but try to control yourself and not do it every month. Like do it very often, right?
Okay. So
Yeah.
it's
So
about finding the right balance where you're satisfied and your wallet's satisfied.
yeah.
But
So sort of like budget is more like it's like a guideline rather than a hard law that you have to follow, right? It's a very good guideline
was
to
there a
have
time you broke
budgeting.
your budget and you went over your limit and you had to splurge on something?
Uh, Definitely. Like back when PY, I could have gotten a
What is
secondhand car.
PY? What is PY?
Oh, sorry, PY is the University of Toronto's way of saying co-op. Basically, we go off
Oh, it's
for a
your
year and a
internship.
half. Yeah, basically, for a co-op, we go off for a year and a half working in the industry to do internship. Yeah, that's co-op. That is what we call PY.
And where
So
did you work
basically,
during
yeah,
your PY?
I worked at Qualcomm.
Okay. You worked at another hardware company.
Yeah,
Qualcomm
they are
makes
famous.
CPU chips, is that right? They among various other things Qualcomm
They
does.
do not. It's not really called CPU. It's like the M1 chip we just mentioned before. It's a SoC. It's a system on chip. So basically, system on chip is basically it has everything on one chip itself. Like you have your CPU, GPU, your RAM, things along those lines. Everything in one package itself.
Hmm.
Yeah. So going back to that splurging thing. Um. Yeah, I was talking about cars. So I could have moved close to the office and basically walked there every day, but I chose to get a car and not like a cheap car like a Honda Fit or like a Corolla. I got a SUV, a Nissan Rogue, which is more expensive, which is not part of my budget. But at the end of the day, with for the year and a half that I owned the car, I really liked it, and it gave me a lot of freedom, I guess, to travel wherever I want with it. Yeah.
All right. So sometimes it's worth it. In hindsight, would you say it's worth it or
Yeah, I still say it's worth it, even though I guess it's a little higher than I expected for my budget. But overall, I feel like, hey, I may just cut down a little bit.
all right?
Maybe instead of 3 movies a month, maybe I just do 2 movies a month, things along those. I just
So
cut down a little bit here and there to sort of even it out.
right. So tell me, when you were working at Qualcomm, I'm not gonna ask the specific numbers, but obviously, I assume at Qualcomm and at Apple, they pay you pretty differently, especially because you're an intern, and now that you're a full time. So
Yeah, definitely.
how does that change for you mentally? Like, do you still budget? Like, how did like if you're I'm gonna make the assumption that you make a lot more money than you used to before, like compared to Qualcomm, and during the time where you had student debt and student loan, and now I assume you're mostly debt free or debt free at this point. Um, how do you view it differently and like how do you think about finances differently since then and now?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there is definitely a huge difference between intern pay and full-time pay, and I guess the mindset that goes on that changes with that is, I guess back then you were looking at cheap stuff, maybe secondhand stuff, but with that newfound wealth, even with the same amount of, let's say, percentage budgeting, you make more, you can splurge a little more now. Like back then you can only have 100, like 10%, which is maybe $100 a month to maybe spend on movies. But now those 10% might be $500. Now you can do a lot more
There's no
things,
way
right?
you spend $500 on movies.
But that's an
What do you do with
example.
all that money? Do you just put it in the savings account and tuck it away? What do you do?
Yeah, so and there another thing that comes up is, as back then my priority was student loans, but now the priority have changed. So my priority right now is saving up for a car, a nice car, or buy a house, right? So that
Being
budgeting
responsible.
part,
I like
the
it.
save,
Being
yeah,
responsible.
Yeah, so there's still that small part of it that I'm still saving up. Like maybe back then I was maybe saving 15% for of my paycheck for a student loan. That 15% is still there, but it's just the budget allocation just goes to somewhere else now, like houses, cars, other things I like to do, which might require a lot of capital costs, a lot of money to happen.
Right. And your current priority is getting a car. What car are you thinking about? What's in the pipeline? Is it
I'm
the
not
new Apple
sure.
car that's coming out in 2024?
I'm very conflicted. Like when you talk about cars, there's a lot of things you can get. You can get SUVs, you can get German, you can get JDMs like an 86, or you can
As
get
far
like
as I
there's
know,
a lot
you're
of
a big
cars.
car enthusiast and you know quite a big deal about cars.
Yeah.
What's your take on getting a secondhand Toyota, which is super economical, versus someone who goes out and straight up buys a new Mercedes?
So,
What tells you about these people? Or maybe car doesn't define, it does a little bit, what would you say? What would you say the rationale or the thinking behind a person who, let's say, both works at Apple or both works at a big tech company, makes six figures? One person goes and buys a secondhand Toyota, and one person goes buys a Mercedes. Like, what do you think about those people, or what do you
uh,
think is going through their minds?
well, it really depends on the person itself, right? So how I see things is like car is in a person's life is usually the second biggest investment they make. And and if you live in the suburbs and you have to commute, like car is basically sort of like a third or second home that you have, and you spend a lot of time in that car itself, like driving through traffic, maybe going out. So in my views, I feel like having a nice interior, having like a lot of safety features, a car that looks nice, maybe goes fast, and it's good to handle. It's a very big thing for me. Like I value those things quite a lot, but maybe for another person that just want to get from A to B and doesn't really care about like the comforts in the car, like that person might get a 10-year-old Corolla, right? So it's really depend on person to person. Some people like more better things in a car because they feel like they spend the money and it's worth it. But other people feel like, hey, this is not worth it. So I'm not gonna spend as much money. So
Mm.
there's not much judgment on there. It really depends on the person itself,
And
right?
what kind of person, like, where do you fit on that spectrum? Like, are you in the middle? Are you going for that Corolla? Are you going for that Mercedes? Or are you really just saving up for that Lamborghini and Porsche and whatever those cars are?
Yeah, for me, I guess from the three spectrums you said, I guess I'm more like the middle one. So sort of you don't go splurge like you get a S class, but maybe we get a cheap A class, but has some more creature comfort than maybe a 10-year-old Corolla. And from there we can also save more money up. And then maybe in 20 years you have enough money to buy a Lamborghini.
I see. That I think that's pretty reasonable. Like, especially for the new grads, people in Silicon Valley, you definitely do have the money to go buy a Mercedes. Like, as far as I know, as some folks I've heard that I've interviewed in the past, they said their sign-on bonus. For those of you who don't know, the sign-on bonus, you basically sign the contract and you get a lump sum of money just for signing the contract. They get something in the order of 50, 75, $100,000, maybe even more, and they can just dump it into a brand new car. And these are new grad software engineers, machine learning engineers we're talking about here that can just like roll up in a Mercedes. I can definitely see that you're more leaning towards reasonable, kind of practical, not splurging, anything like that. Now,
Yeah,
I want your
definitely.
opinion on autonomous driving. Obviously, Tesla is, I don't know if they're the forefront of autonomous vehicles. They're definitely the forefront of electric vehicles. The autonomous driving industry or the technology backing autonomous vehicles is definitely on the rise. Where do you see this now? Like, where are we now? And how long before, if I say I buy a car, and like, let's say I walk up to my friend's house in my car and I say I drove here, how long before people assume that I didn't drive and the car drove? Like, at what point does the default kind of value of saying I drove change from manual to automatic?
Yeah, so right now, a lot of cars right now is either with L3 or L2, which is basically partial or conditional automation. So that's where we are
And
right
these
now.
L's, L2s, L3s are levels, and like I guess there's
Yeah,
like one, two, like what's the
yeah.
top?
So it starts from so there's six levels of autonomous driving, and zero means no automation at all. And we have L5 with full automation. That means we don't have any driver input. You basically sit in a car, like those really futuristic cars you see at car shows, where basically there's not even a driving. There's not even was it driving the wheel, and
What's
basically the
what's
vehicle just
L6?
drives. So they just go. So L5 is full automation. L4 is high automation. L3 is conditional. L2 is partial. L1 is like driving a system like cruise control, and L0 is no automation. Means well, these kind of cars usually don't exist in today's world. So we're not really going to talk about that. But right now with Teslas, they are at L2s and L3s, and I guess with the roadmap that Elon Musk has, in a year or two, we can hit L4s and L5s. So
Within a year or two. So in 2022 or 2023, if I say I just drove from my friend's place, you can't really make the assumption, did this guy really drive or did the car do the driving? Like, we
yeah.
wouldn't.
So yeah, we at that point in a year or two, we will not know because this is still very new tech, and as you have to pay the I guess the new adopter tax for it. So and at least I believe in the next at least next 5 to 10 years, like you would not make that same assumption. Maybe in maybe 10 to 20 years, maybe that assumption is much more valid because those more expensive hardwares and features start to trickle down into like normal level cars that basically most people buy.
So basically, in the beginning, it'll start slow. And these machines, I've heard that the more people driving these cars, the smarter they'll get. Like if I have five Teslas, one driving in Buenos Aires or something, and another driving in Shanghai, and another one driving in Los Angeles, the experience gained from the one in Buenos Aires is like transferred and taught to the other two in Shanghai and Los Angeles, and they all basically combine their experience to become a smarter driver.
Yeah, so a lot of the self-driving tech right now uses machine learning, and with machine learning, you need a lot of data. So with these kind of new cars, they are proving platforms. They're also data gatherers for these companies like Tesla. Basically, you drive around and basically they taking data from them sensors and Tesla train their models to be better. So something from Bruno Aires might be applicable to some to somewhere in Shanghai and vice versa, and sort of that's how these companies work. Like they take your data and they train machine learning models on it, and overall it helps make the car smarter and better.
That's crazy. That is the real future. Like
Yeah,
self-driving. So how long before planes becomes autonomous? Like pilots. I heard pilots are
funny you
one of
said that.
the difficult, most challenging for their health because they're shifting time zones all the time. Their sleep cycle is all off, and they're working like some of these long haul flights are 14, 15 hours. Obviously, I don't know if they get any sleep. Like how and these truck drivers too, right? Like I need to deliver my Amazon package from the west coast to the east coast. I don't know if that's all done by plane or some of it's done by trucks. I don't know how the logistics work on that, but this is going to fix a lot of problems. And how long would you say like the priority, like where does the technology go first? Like the self driving, I think it can be applied in planes, trucks, semi truck drivers, um, ambulances, like, or does it go to the masses first, or does it where does this technology go to first?
Yeah, so with self with self-driving or self-assistant, there's a lot of applications of it. One of the things you mentioned is aircraft, so there's a name for it called autopilot. And these systems has been in place since the beginning of aviation. And basically a pilot's job these days is not really to fly, but rather to monitor the aircraft and make sure nothing is wrong. We are on the right flight path. We are on the right flight path. Like planes today can basically you put in a bunch of waypoints, a point of dots on the map, and they basically fly themselves. Like they can land themselves, they can take off themselves.
Is that also through machine learning, or is that just
No,
like
those are not done through machine learning. Those are done through data points. So basically, there is a GPS location of different points, and you basically set in the speed you want, the altitude you want. The pilot still have to control various things, but a lot of things in the plane itself is automated.
right?
And in the sky, I guess it's a little I think it's a little better than the ground because you have other cars, you have people walking. It's much more predictable in the air. So there's no machine learning model in the air. Everything is more deterministic, which is just data points. You just key in the data point and basically the plane will just basically follow there. If it's off, it will basically correct itself to get to that data point. That's it.
So how long before I see pilotless? Like we always talk about driverless cars, and Uber is already working on driverless, basically Uber cabs, if you will. How long before I like hop into a plane and there's no windshield, no pilot.
There's no
There's
pilot.
only
Yeah.
the crew that serves you the little like nasty crackers and whatnot.
Yeah, this is a very hard question actually, because if you think about it, in a car, there's only four or five people, and when you get into an accident in a car, there's the chances of death is much lower than compared to in the sky where you have from small planes like
You mean the
50 people
casualty
to
is much bigger on a plane,
yeah,
and
yeah, because
there's a
the
level
risk
of risk
factor.
involved.
Yeah, the risk factor is much more higher in the air. So that's why, even though autopilot has been in aircraft since the beginning of flying, the job of the pilot has never been gone. Like there's still two pilots on every plane that basically monitors the aircraft for emergency scenarios. And as we have seen from year over year, there's plenty of scenarios that comes up that requires a human intervention to get it to make sure that everyone doesn't die on the plane. Like the Hudson River, U.S. aircraft, U.S. Airways crash back in 2000s. Like that was a very good like scenario. Both engines flamed out because of ingesting. I think those were yeast into both engines. Basically, you lose all propulsion. Now, if there's no pilot there, the aircraft is going to fly straight and it's going to lose altitude and crash into Manhattan. But with a pilot intervention, they managed to land it in the river instead of crashing into a building.
Right. So it's the same idea with a car, except the kind of downside, the number of casualties would be much greater with a plane. So let's say the technology for the plane is already like it feels like you're saying the technology for autopilot or full autonomy in a plane is pretty much more achievable because there's less factors like, oh, there's not a random kid with a chasing down a ball on the street, the classic example, and there's no lights, there's no like trees in the way or whatnot. There's no traffic
Yeah.
signs you need to follow. So it seems like a much easier problem to solve. But it looks like because of the risk, because of the casualties, and for that, the trust factor for an autonomous plane, even though the technology is there, might come later than the car, which is a technologically more challenging problem to solve.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because the number of people and the complexity of the system involved, I feel like aircraft will adopt this kind of maybe driverless or pilotless flights much later.
Do you like
Like even
driving
you see
yourself?
right
Do you like
now.
driving the car yourself, or
Yeah,
if you had the option to do autopilot, how often would you use it?
Uh, I guess for maybe for day-to-day commutes where you have start and stop traffic, like radar cruise control where the car can stop and start for you is always it's always very useful. Like it reduces your stress while driving and you can relax on your way there. But maybe on the weekend you can go out to the coastline and enjoy the air, like and go through turns and drive the car around and feel the car, right? So I feel
Right.
like you need to have a mix. Like on some days, like commute, it's good to have a driverless car. It saves you time. It reduces stress. But there are times where if you're like, I want to go out and have some fun with the car, like drifting around, driving around the track. Where these things, if you do in a driverless car,
You
you're
know,
basically
feel
a
the
passenger.
car, feel the engine
Yeah,
yourself, you know, and go a little
yeah,
fast, go a little slow, do your thing on the car. With autonomous vehicles, you don't have that experience.
yeah. You're basically a passenger. Like
So
no difference.
tell me, for you personally, let's say tomorrow, let's say, in a year from now, after everybody gets vaccinated, or coronavirus ends, or, in one way or another, things, get back to normal. And let's say you hop on a plane for the first time, you're on a vacation, and you're flying to somewhere, a long haul flight, and you get on the plane, you don't see the pilot, and soon after you buckle your seatbelt, you hear a robotic voice saying, basically, this is a pilotless plane, and a fully autonomous system will take you to your destination. How would you feel? Like, would you feel like completely safe? Would you have a nice sleep on the way? Or would you be like afraid? Would you be like, let's get me off? Like, I want to get into a plane with an actual pilot.
Truth to be said, I would say get me off, but things with aviation, right? Everything is heavily scrutinized in aviation. Like the
Like with
max,
that
like
drone example earlier, right? Like
yeah,
the
your drone
FAA.
example and the 737 Max debacle where two plane crashed because of stuff. Like planes are really highly scrutinized things. Like they have to go through months and months of testing before they can even be certified to carry passengers. Like for but if you take a car, maybe you just need to pass emissions and you need to pass crash tests, and that's all you need to have a car on the road. Like the testing is totally different. So if one is, let's say in a hypothetical scenario where after COVID and someone get on plane and has this autoless pilotless plane, I believe the FAA or the regulator of that country has fully certified the plane to make sure that nothing is going to happen. Is safe. It can it can do everything a pilot do. It goes through all the training, basically all the training the pilot does, and it can actually fly itself and handle scenarios, right? So
And that's gonna be difficult, like a moral dilemma. Like if you're an AI robot, like flying a plane, like are you gonna, like, let's say you have the option to, like, let's say your plane is damaged and you either kill everybody on the plane or crash into a town. Like, what do you do? Do you start counting the number of heads, or like that's a similar dilemma is in autonomous driving, right? If your car can't stop in time, and you basically have to make a choice between like risk the safety of your passengers versus risk the safety of like the pedestrians. Like, what do you do? Like who decides that? Like what, like for autonomous vehicles and like FAA, is it FAA who gets the call on this, or who gets the call on that?
I guess in terms of aircraft, I
And
guess it's
who is
FAA.
responsible? Like, let's say like design an autonomous vehicle, and say, like, we make the decision to say, oh, kill the least number of people or something. Like, can someone sue me? Like, that surely
Yeah,
you
I
can I
guess
can be sued.
yeah, definitely because the implementation of these AI systems at the end of the day comes down to the manufacturers themselves, right? So in some sense, it might be suable, but these things of everything with autonomous, with robotless, with robots, with AI, has to go through long debates through the government to set up rules. So the people, the manufacturers are protected from these kind of scenarios, right? So there is like this is really about AI. What was it? Ethicals, like is it the ethics on AI. So I'm not very familiar with this topic, but this is a really highly scrutinized like part of machine learning and AI that lawmakers all over the world is putting a lot of effort into, right?
Do you have a
Because
fear of AI taking over the world? Like Elon Musk once said, like, general artificial intelligence is something we should be afraid about. What's your take on that? Like, is this actually going to be a big problem? Are we like these AI systems can do a lot of things, but so far, it does only one thing. It drives a car, it drives a plane,
Yeah.
it trades stocks, but it can't. I never seen an AI that I can like have a discussion with, or that can pass a Turing test, right? Like the Turing test is the ultimate test to see if this AI can trick me to believing that it's a human or not, or a robot or not. So why are we afraid about self-driving cars? Like, what's the risk here?
Right. So like with everything, I guess there must be a fine balance of it. Right. With Elon Musk saying, I don't really fully agree with what Elon Musk said with everything's AI. I feel like AI must be at the end of the day must be controlled by humans, or else you might have things like the Terminator, the movie, where you have robot soldiers basically having their mind of their own and killing off people, right? So
How
in
how
some sense,
close are we to
are we
that future?
creating?
Like a lot of these movies and a lot of these movies oftentimes do a good job of predicting the future, and sometimes do a terrible job of predicting the future. As someone inside a big tech company, I you might not have all the insider knowledge to share, but obviously, like, how close are we to kind of this kind of fear where we say, like, like, how far are we, like, as a person, like a normal person, working like a day job as an accountant or something. We have no idea how far are we in the technology of AI? Like, how close are we to kind of realizing this fear?
I am not sure. I'm not in this field, so I'm not a very good expert in this. But I feel like we are still pretty far away, hopefully.
So we should still be cautious, but it's still a long place away from at least
Right,
where we
right,
are.
definitely. Definitely. You definitely should have government oversight on these kind of
What do you think will
projects.
come first? Self-driving cars, like what did you say, L5, L4, L5 cars, or some robot that passes the Turing test? Like, what's gonna come first?
Mm, I'm not sure actually. Like I've seen computer AIs that are pretty good. Like you have things like chatbots, but some of them you still can really tell like if you're talking to a real person versus like chatbot. So I would say maybe self-driving cars because of everything in the news. And I feel like we are getting closer with so many different companies developing these
There's so many
features. Like
AI startups. They're like doing research, like these labs and whatever. There's so much like money poured into AI these days. I totally agree with you. It's quite uncertain like how fast these things will develop. Last, I want to ask you one last question, Luke. With your new job at Apple, with coronavirus pandemic going on, with drones, autonomous vehicles, your finances, the U.S. Moving to the U.S. What's next for you? What's in the roadmap for you in the next, like, 1, 2, 5, 10 years from now? Like, what are you looking forward to the next?
no idea. Living every day as its last.
Living every day. I like that. I like that a lot.
Living in the moment. I'm not
Living in the
sure.
moment.
Like right now, right now, on my long-term goals is just moving to the States. Other than that, buying a car. Other than that, not much else. Like I'm not sure.
Why do you want to move? What do you look forward to the most about moving to the States? You're currently in Toronto, is that right?
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And you're
Yeah,
moving to
I guess the
Cupertino,
big
right?
thing.
Is Apple
Yeah,
headquarters in
California,
Cupertino?
California, South Bay, South Bay. So I guess the big thing is the weather.
The weather. And how is the
Um,
weather in Toronto? I heard it gets pretty cold
uh,
up there in Canada, right?
yeah, definitely. So a northern country. So there is snow
Mm-hmm.
here, and it's pretty cold here. So and there is snow. So I don't really like it. I was born in in the southern part of China, and I like it that way. So
Southern part
moving
of
to
China,
somewhere
is
that,
it very hot in southern part of China? It is pretty
yeah,
low on
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah. The weather is
latitude.
nice. Yeah, 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 definitely. So I'm looking forward to moving to a warmer weather where I don't have to deal with the winters and putting on winter sweaters just to get out.
Just to get out, you can just like go out, get a coffee in your flip flops and your pajamas.
Yeah,
No one's gonna say
yeah.
anything. And over
It's
in
not like
Toronto,
no
you're
one
gonna
would say
freeze
anything, but
over.
you not die on the way
You
there.
don't die on the way there. That's totally true. What else other than the weather? Well, what are you gonna miss most about Toronto and Canada? Like, what's one thing that you found
Um,
most convenient, or you're gonna miss? Other
Toronto.
than family, of course. I assume you're gonna miss
Yeah,
your family the
I guess
most.
the only yeah, I guess family and friends, I guess, is the biggest one because I am moving to a brand new place and like it's a brand new world to me. And I've lived in Toronto for what, 10 years? All my friends, everyone is here. So I guess that is the one I most miss the most. Other than that, maybe poutine.
Poutine. Oh man, poutine. I love poutine. I think I went to Quebec City, like not in the province of Quebec, in Canada once. I had poutine almost every day. Like it's so good. It's just fries, gravy, and the cheese curds that you can't find anywhere
Yeah.
else in the States. It's so good, man. I think
Yeah.
I gained so much weight over that trip. It's not even funny.
Yeah.
I
It's a
definitely miss
Canadian.
poutine.
Yeah, it's a Canadian thing, right?
And
Yeah.
you get these poutines from like sometimes in like Taco Bell or whatever they give you these
Yeah.
poutines and they put like shredded cheddar cheese onto there and they put like weird gravy onto these like thin French fries. It's not it. That's not totally not the same. So
Yeah, definitely.
I already miss it and you're definitely gonna miss it too.
Yeah.
Well, Luke,
Thank you
thank you
for having
for
me.
the interview.
Thank
Um,
you.
and it's been an honor and I'll see you next time.
See you next time. Thank
Bye.
you very much.